Welcome to the Augmented Society Network. It's a thematic network from the Royal Society of Arts and Manufacture. We explore here at the ASN and we collaborate, reflect on the future of human interaction with technology. Our topic today is AI and art and turning binary into beauty. Now, Jonathan is the crafts person really when it comes to the titles, but he does manage to encapsulate the topic, I think, really well. So I'd like to just start with Jonathan. Can you kick us off and take us through our realm for today?
Thanks everybody for being here for this conversation. Artists have maintained the role of shining a light on what is truly going on in our world for eons. And some say that this mantle can and will be taken over by artificial intelligence. But as there's always been biases within the artist's works and the viewers of these works, the concerns of bias within artificial is always discussed, but never seemingly addressed deeply enough. And the question of what happens when the two meet. And there are some artists that are very clearly dealing with this. And we even have people on the call today that are completely immersed in technology and design and art. But artist Trevor Paglin is utilizing Amazon data to create artworks that reveal its intrinsic bias. Katie Peterson's artistic focus considers our relation to the universe, and her work, As the World Turns from 2010, challenges us to perceive relationships differently by showing a record playing at the same speed as the Earth turns. And do we care that the record would take 4 years to complete? And are we more busy either contemplating or ignoring that multiple forms of AI are rendering reality obsolete through deep fakes, malicious bots, or finely tuned content distribution? And how do we shed a light on what is really happening in the attempt to stave off our collective demise? Is the utilization of AI and the creation of art contradictory or even unhuman? So what we're really hoping to get out of this conversation is, what can we learn from artists' visualizations of technology's impact on humanity? Can we reveal the deep joy of artistic expression and apply it to our own understanding? And are the artists right, and can they save us all? So we start off with those ideas, and let's just see where it takes us.
So I didn't know quite where to start. So I started to look at what creativity actually is. And is there an artist or artists who have shown us something that we've either ignored or that has come to fruition? And my favourite piece is the exhibition space at the Barbican in London. I know I was lucky enough to just get a quick view back into London for a few weeks, and it's called Apple to Anomaly. The exhibition starts with Ce n'est pas une pomme, the René Magritte from 1964, I believe, where the artist actually painted an apple and said, "No, it's not an apple." And at the time, that's clearly an interesting idea of what things are in reality. And it's something that he followed up with many other objects, including his urinal, for example. But what I'm absolutely fascinated by is the fact that this is what, to me, computers have done in terms of visual recognition and artificial intelligence. They've actually turned this round now to say that, no, this is an apple. This is what we consider to be an apple. This is how we've classified an apple. And then I got further into taxonomies and everything else. What I find interesting is that actually, to me now, the use of visualization shows that this really is not an apple anymore. And it's so true now that the way we use images, to me, is so not what is now real. And I don't know if I've explained that very well, but I feel like I've gone back to when René Magritte did this. And I feel like he had a vision on where we are in terms of using imagery to determine what people are doing, who they are, whether they're rich, whether they're poor, whether I can sell them something. And that's kind of where I got all stuck in and completely immersed. in the topic that we have today. So a couple of things: what's reality, and what does creativity really mean?
So I appreciate that you went back to what does creativity really mean, and I think a lot of what we're dealing with here with utilizing technology is technology able to create something creative? And if we're looking at certain artists, whether they created something to provoke, to bring that emotionality into a space, whether it is taking that item, whether it's real or not, because a painting of an apple is certainly not an apple. You can't eat it. A question to me is, if we're going to throw up our hands and say, oh, well, artificial intelligence is going to take over all, a question of, is it truly going to replace us as humans in creating, period? And, we could point to examples of a trailer that is completely edited by artificial intelligence, or a script that is output. And there was, God, I can't remember his name, the from Baywatch and Knight Rider. Come on, the Germans love him as David Hasselhoff.
No.
Right, there you go. Thank you, Pip. David Hasselhoff is in a short video. All of the dialogue was created by a computer. And is that truly creative? That's some of the stuff that I would love to dive into. And I know Pip is dealing with the visualization that is afforded through computing. I know we've all been dealing with it in certain ways. Do we feel that we're going to find that emotional connection to things that are not created by people?
So wanted to introduce Ben as well. He's an artist, he's a painter, but he also works in technology as well. Do you want to describe a little bit what you do?
Hello, everybody.
Hi,
Hello.
I'm a painter by training, taught a lot, sort of classically trained. I started moving into architecture, sort of bridging art and architecture some time back, and that led into a kind of broader scope, bridging artists and engineers in general. And then about 5 years ago, got into actually product design on some tools to pull painting into the digital age a bit more. So basically building printers specifically for artists. So we went through a period at MIT, prototyping a bunch of machines, and then took those out into the field, working with a lot of tier 1 artists, some mid-career artists with the tools, experimenting with them, seeing what the most interesting functionality is with them, and now thinking a little bit broader about how to create a framework where we can develop some technology that actually might have some quote unquote real world impact in industry, identical technology that would have some impact in industry and have an interesting overlap with a lot of creative applications to grow business into something that would fund the creative stuff as an R&D space, but also to, in a larger context, give a greater degree of communication between engineers and artists that otherwise wouldn't have the ability to effectively communicate.
Why it was interesting, why I brought Ben in here, is that we've talked a lot about the space between how we understand art and how we understand engineering. And I think the interesting space is always in that area of human wiggle, human wobble. The difference between just printing something and painting something is that is the difference between digital and analog. Digital is discrete, analog is continuous, and painting has that more continuous elements to it. And so when we think about creativity and definition, you talk about binary. So that's the issue that I think that computers have in terms of definitions, is that binary element, and creativity for me exists in between those binary elements. So if you talk to me about an apple, I could just reel off many, many different things. An apple could be related to religion. It could be related to carnal knowledge. It could be related to all of these other things. It could be related to pie. It could be, there are so many different things that come to my mind instantly. And it's about metaphor. I think that is one of the crucial elements of art. And Kenya Hara, who is the designer for Muji, wrote that creativity is to discover a question that's never been asked. And I think that is one of the purposes of art. And one of the machines can give us interesting provocations, but it's sort of it's understanding that intent as well, and that excitement of the new that I'm not sure that machines can fully understand the potential of a new question, of a new metaphor.
I love that whole thing about the questions, which then goes to one of the things that I love about artificial intelligence, or let's just say something like a supercomputer like Watson, where I just take from it that it is able to draw up the questions that we hadn't thought to ask. So if we're talking about the supercomputing as being able to process and provide those questions, does that then get close? If we're talking about supercomputers, if we're talking about where it's not just on and off, but there's more variants of on and off, and it's not white or black, or is that going to get us closer to having a computer create those questions for us?
I mean, it's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, really, isn't it? That was what the Earth is about. It's the supercomputer to find the question to the answer.
Right.
Yeah. Except the parameters that are predefined, and the idea that can actually be transformational. Different kinds of creativity require volition. I don't see how that works with computers at the moment, even though, Jonathan, I think you're referring to quantum computing as well, or we were certainly talking about it earlier, weren't we?
Right.
That ability to have anomaly or uncertainty. Pip, where are you on that? Does that actually exist? Does that wobbly line exist? You've just said it doesn't. But in your research, do you see any elements of the wobble in the line coming back?
Part of the interesting elements of my research, my research was exploring serendipity in the digital world, essentially, and discovery of new ideas, new things consists, when related to serendipity, consists of serendipity, but also sagacity. And sagacity is the wisdom to know what to do with that serendipitous prompt. When we all talk about computers, I think that it's communication is twofold. It's human-computer interaction. We are the humans. We can get the wobbly line based on how we perceive the information from the computer. Is it a prescription or is it a provocation? So one of the things that is interesting as well is also, how do we teach ourselves to take in the information we're given by all of these tools in a more creative, in a more abstracted way, to take this information as a provocation, not just a dictate for this is the answer.
And how has that affected your work then?
It's pretty central. I take your point about volition. I take that to be such a central tenet of any piece of art that's interesting. I almost think the questions around the future of AI in art, they're so speculative that I feel like they should be relegated to a small aspect of the conversation. I feel like the more interesting things to deal with the tools as they exist right now, like on the cutting edge. Is there anything that makes, I think of all the great paintings that have ever been made, if they were made by some sort of machine without what we consider volition, would that be interesting other than just as some sort of novelty? Not a novelty like fashion. It's a flash in the pan, but like I'm thinking about the things that last for hundreds of years and they just get more interesting, not less interesting. I think that can only happen with ability to process information in a way that I don't think any machine has promise of coming close to, as far as we understand them now. But we all maybe might have a limited idea of what's possible. But I think what's possible in our lifetime seems to me so limited compared to what people are capable of in terms of creativity. I take the point of view of, in terms of like just the engineering, focusing only on the tools, only on the aspects of the tools that can go way beyond what a person can normally do. So I'm making painting tools of which every part is computational. And there's any part that, like a paintbrush, is something a person is much better using a paintbrush than a robot. So I insist we're not going to even try to do that. It's interesting from a computer science point of view, but not from a creativity point of view. An inkjet head is something that is fully computational. And to play around with the wiggle part of that is lots of variables that mess it up. And that's where humans can really adjust the amount of screw up in the system to get interesting effects. But like the volition, like how you do that, is something that's a man-machine it's a man-machine issue, but like where you let the person come in and where you let the machine come in seems to me like that's a really interesting question.
Was interested in Simon Colton, partly because he went to Goldsmiths and so did I. Got to hold on to anything. But I was fascinated how the painting fool involved, how would that have fed into your work?
So who is Simon Colton?
He was a Goldsmiths.
Yeah, we got the Goldsmiths part already, Zoe. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I beg your pardon. He did research at Goldsmiths post-grad. He was
did he go to Goldsmiths?
Yeah, he did.
Oh,
no way!
In terms of
really?
Novel or just capturing people's attention, he did a portrait of Obama, which was what kind of drew all the attention onto the painting Fool. Right.
Yeah,
and he then did the Poetic Fool, and he was painting. He was using programming to paint. Yeah. And I just wondered if that had, this was back in 2001, I think, if my notes are correct. I just wondered if that had come into play for you.
It's been a fascinating period over the past few decades to see every creative domain totally transformed by digital tech except for painting, and change not only in the way that the work is produced, the way it's distributed, sold, and promoted. From painting point of view, there's obviously a tremendous explosion in digital imaging tools for everything from advertising to digital painting tools. But they're still stuck on a screen. The thing that makes painting is it's this interface between an image and a physical object. And it's to me, the thing that's unique about that is, and tell me if this makes sense, the less you understand between the image that you're seeing and the way that image is made, the more interesting it is. There's a gap. When you see brush marks on a canvas and you see an image of those brush marks, you can understand how those images make that brush mark, how those brush marks make that image. There's like just these little shapes, and then you look back and it looks fully like that was pre-photography, but he understood the nature of photography somehow. So, Chuck Close is the same way. There's this gap between the way that you make something and the image that we see. And the harder it is to cross that gap in your mind, the more interesting the work is. And so the problem I see an inherent problem with digital tools is that they're algorithmic, that you're always going to get essentially the same result because there's a pattern. It's when the non-algorithmic process from the human mind comes in where you don't see what that relationship is. How do you make blur in an interesting way? Right.
It's like we were all excited from a animation standpoint, tweening. I didn't have to do all the frames. It's going to work it out for me. But you had to build in that methodology to make that happen. Two things, Ben, that really struck to me. First is a question.
Yeah.
Which printer company do you feel has done the best creating that wiggle room?
It's so funny. We're building all of our hardware in Israel. And what's interesting is, so most of the printing companies are owned by the Japanese. There's a lot of Chinese knockoffs from that technology. There's a little bit in Israel, a little bit in the UK, a little bit in Germany. The majority of it is in Japan. There's like half of HP, Indigo, is based in Israel. It is a huge industry there. The thing that made it unique is that they actually made the actual technology in terms of like the resolution worse, but the overall effect is better. And so what they got into is they saw that a big part of the result is based not in the actual like resolution of the image, but it's about the way we perceive it because of where the dots are. And how when you lay the dots, instead of doing it like this, if you do like this and then rake it by 1 degree, the eye reads the image totally differently.
Right.
Less resolution, you just change one small parameter in the way that the paint, so to speak, is put down, different brush mark, and the effect is categorically different. Really, the technology, so to speak, is understanding human perception, not about core technology. And he made $1 billion doing that.
Is that change, is that programmed in, or is it programmed to be completely organic? You get what I'm saying?
In the end, it's hardwired into the system now. But so what we're trying to do now is really blow it out of the water. We basically took an inkjet head, put it on the end of a robot arm, and then allow a combination of a lot of change to the physical movement the motion control of the head combined with direct programming of the nozzle. On an industrial printer, they spend lots of time figuring out the math on all of those calculations, how to get the right effect, and they just do it over and over again very quickly. But that's the entire industry. There's no part of the industry which has kind of done what we're trying to do, which is to have much more of that be something you can dynamically control, directly control the image processing. And then, so that to me is like, that's paint, that's brushstrokes for a computer.
I think that's the interesting thing, that when we talk about art and how digital plays into it, I think it's important to distinguish between process and production, because if we think about digital fabrication in general, it's a very production-based technology. So you basically just push play. And it prints, and then you're like, okay, it's almost right, I need to change this thing. It's very hard to change it along the way in all types of digital. Even when you're running an algorithm, unless you put some stops in, it just runs, you see what it does, then you then go back and change it. It's not inherently designed to allow you to play and change those variables as you go along. And I think that when we start talking about these things, I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I think that it's when we able to talk about art as process and what features in technologies we need in order to do that, but then also technologies that we use for the production of art as well is slightly different, and things to consider.
Yeah, it certainly points to the complexity. One of the things that I brought up earlier about the emotionality, there's also the humanity. Ben, when you were talking about the perfection, I'll change mediums. So moving out of paint, print, whatever, into music. I love Rush. I didn't need to see them live. I've seen them live a couple of times, but I didn't need to, because when they play live, they are so perfect. Unfortunately, we'll never be able to experience that again because Neil Peart dying, but there's that. On the other hand, my favorite of all time is Radiohead.
I used to play the drums. I was just obsessed with it.
Obviously, for good reason.
Yeah.
For me, my favorite all time now is Radiohead. And I could see them 100 times. I could see Ani DeFranco 100 times. I could see Fish 100 times and know that there's going to be those imperfections. And they're not bugging out about it. It's just like, yeah, Tom York might say, whatever, but it's still, they embrace the difference. And that's, Zoe shared something. I don't know if she's an artist or a scientist or what, but her name is Hannah Davis. And she looked at how can we change creativity from one medium to the other. And she was looking at, her exploration was, how do you take it from the written word into music? And it exemplifies what we're dealing with computers, is that it is a one-to-one basis with computers. Unless you have that human instruction and change. And she found that you could assign a certain string or drum beat or whatever to certain words. But if you do it just that way, then something that would be a writing that would be morose or deep or dark could come across as being very playful and fun. And Zoe shared with me this, the TED Vienna, where if you wanted to see what she presents, it's really interesting. It took her going in and really looking at, well, what makes the words emotional? Where is the emotionality? And she had to add that extra layer, and it was the fine tuning. And at that point, she was then able to truly make it creative and be emotional, where she took the same book, the same words, by adding that extra layer that she added on, which removes it from just the binary. And that's where we found the emotionality in the music that more aligned with what the context was.
Yeah, with an actual musician. But I was just thinking about you all the time, Pip, when I was looking at that and some of the work that you've done in terms of linking different spheres together, and the idea that you apply one thing to something else and you come with a whole different style of interface, for example. What are you up to at the moment?
I have been thinking a lot about considering how we're all now shut down a little bit, where serendipity comes from in those moments, designing some tools that I can share with people to link things together in new ways. But also what's interesting as well is considering, just the general state of anxiety. I think we get into a more scarcity mindset, which actually maybe makes us less open to those serendipitous provocations. And so, considering, the role of serendipity in these different times, thinking about how to, present it to people in a way that is inspiring and relevant in a time of more sort of scarcity utilitarian mindset. I'm exploring how to take my research into the real world. It's been sort of an interesting time to think about that.
So as you've gone into the real world, what has the response been? Because it is still dealing with this technology that people are still in some ways afraid of or mistrusting. Have you found any brushback from others based on that, or what's your response been?
The biggest pushback with my work is that I go against sort of the standard AI trend of automation of like, do the research, give you the answer. I'm very much leaning in the person who completes it, who finds the question that's never been asked is you. That big space between the binary and the analog, specifically to cause those provocations in yourself, because I don't want to prescribe to you what's the most important thing that's going to crop up in your mind, because that's how intuition works. I call these tools dowsing sticks for the intuition. So those are the things that are going to be the most meaningful, the most impactful, the most motivating, are the ideas that really spring up from inside you, rather than the ideas that a computer has told you to work on. So part of it is creating that right balance of, I call it somewhat relatedness. So it's not like Googling something and you get the obvious answer. It's finding the non-obvious answer, but still connected so that it's not random. But also on the other side of it, it's preparing the viewer of that information with a sagacious mindset, with the ability to take that provocation and know how to use it, to find it impactful. So it's two parts. So part of it is the tools that I develop, which create those serendipitous provocations, drawing from wide range of information on the internet. But the second part of it is also workshops and sort of more educational training sessions that help us get into this more liminal mindset, where we have an ability to make those more abstract connections and understand that pathway through the unknown. And feel confident to discover those questions that are unknown. The pushback that I sometimes get is it doesn't make enough sense. And I'm like, well, yes, that's the point.
Right.
So it's, I think it's finding that balance. And this is the interesting moment that we're in right now. It's we're all in this sort of hunkered down utility scarcity mindset framing. And so it's still trying to get people to understand how the value of opening up to these new ideas, to these unknown worlds in an uncertain time. So
Right.
How do I create that sort of emotional support to provide that sort of cognitive curiosity at the same time?
It's the willingness to, as Otto Scharmer very clearly put in one of his writings, which I've found compelling. When we go through turmoil, we have to do more of the letting go and move to the letting come, being open to that stuff, which is so key. It's, as you're talking, it's almost like you're bringing that structure of technology. It's almost like you're bringing the lo-fi to the AI.
Yes, my work is very lo-fi. That's the key, actually, is simplicity. In my own design principle is often, if I try and get too smart about it, I'm like, oh, we can do this and this and this and feature creep. And I'm like, no, my design principle is do the opposite of what the engineer in me wants to do, which is figure it all out. And I'm actually teach myself, no, pull back. Don't give all of the answers. Don't.
How do we bring the humanity? We could just say, oh, AI is going to do whatever, but no, it requires.
So 100 years ago, if we were having the same conversation, we'd be discussing whether or not photography was going to replace art, or whether it was art.
But also the brilliant point that photography enabled artists to concentrate less on making things look real.
Yeah.
Drawing, Picasso, Braque, all of those other movements where things were freer because reality was taken care of by another medium.
And then it turns out using photography, you could do things that you couldn't have done before. So it extended the reach of the artist.
which then impacted on how people actually drew and painted.
Right. And then the other question is probably if we were talking about this 55, 60 years ago, we would have been questioning if a person takes LSD and does an artwork, is it really art? You know? But we would have been talking about that because people were talking about it back. Not that I was around much then. I was young. But
so I love the way Buckminster Fuller has come in and out of everything that I've ever read about, essentially. But sorry, Mick.
It's just interesting how these conversations, the technology changes, but the questions don't really change that much.
I don't think it's ever going to be a real issue. It's like the question about the singularity is a question about what is truth, essentially. And for me, it's, you know, truth is a continual thing. I feel like there will always be responses to what the current technology does. I mean, for me, it's exciting that Trevor Paglen has done this "what is an apple" thing, or more to the point, what does a computer think an apple is? Because for me, I'm like, it's almost like a creative challenge. I'm like, I could think of way more exciting things about what an apple is. And I think that maybe that's the interesting opportunity that computers offer us, or technology offers us, is that it is a challenge for humans to be more creative. They're like, that's not creative enough. I can do something completely different. But it's being able to make sure that the attitude that we have, and I'm sure that the artists always will have this attitude, but it's always that questioning, that critiquing. I think there was I'll think of the quote later, but someone was saying that the next Turing test won't be because computers are really smart, it's because humans have become more dumb. And so it's sort of making sure that we still keep questioning. I think one of, actually the Turing test, did you know that they have the award for the most human, which I think is fascinating. because it's really hard to be the human in these blind tests against the computer, because often humans are very formulaic about what we'll say and do. And so it's an interesting moment to reflect on how can we not be just like a machine? How can we still continue to keep pushing our differences as a conscious species?
I went on a tour of the Tate Modern. The guide gave us a description of sublime. This is what art really is. It's the sublime. And for years since, I've tried to work out what sublime really means and how that could be reflected in or by using something digital. I don't know what anyone else's thoughts are on whether art is sublime or sublime is art.
When you say about sublime, and sublime means something different to every single one of us. As humanity tries to clump everybody together, and so that it's a mass thing, I think it's going to be harder and harder to figure out what sublime means as we're trying to figure out what it means to everyone, when that should have never been the question. It should be, what does sublime mean to you? And go with it. And Pip, to your point before about human, a lot of times we as humans try to answer things the way we think we're expected to answer, as opposed to just going with, I think you even used the word intuition before, or gut. Just be ourselves and go with our gut and answer that way. That's what makes us human. It's the checking ourselves that hurts us.
So essentially, I think a lot of it all comes down to measurement. And, the measurements that we have is the language for how we can describe something. And especially in today's post-Enlightenment, scientifically driven discourse, it's a lot about how we measure things. We can't reliably or quantifiably measure intuition. And I see this as a designer working with consultancies. Everyone's like, if you say that to an artist, it's so hard to say at the beginning of a project. You can plan out roughly where you're going, but also it's completely an antithesis to the creative process. It's a scientific process. You have a hypothesis, you're going to prove it or not prove it. And design is a much more exploratory field than that. And the exciting thing is coming up with a question that you didn't even think to ask initially. And that's really hard to, I'm sure that you've experienced all this, really hard to share that with more quantitative metrics driven people.
And I would say a company that has tried to bottle that is IDEO, if that's however you pronounce it, IDEO. They've tried to take that and not just combine the art and the engineering and whatever your question is, come up with the question that you haven't asked, to come up with the answer that meets the need that you don't even know that you had. So that's how they project themselves.
Yeah.
And Jonathan, that's probably what you do, probably better than them, right?
No, I don't know. I've never worked with them, but that is one of the things that we warn our clients, that we will invariably come up with many more questions than they feel comfortable getting.
When you were talking about the sublime, I think that what's interesting is that so Freud wrote a lot about the sublime, as well as Jung. That relates also to this concept of synchronicity, which is where this sort of almost divine act of where ideas come from. And it's interesting, I think that there is a lot of millennials and Gen Zs are really connecting to astrology now, which is interesting. And it sort of also relates to Alain de Botton's writing about how this lack of engagement with religion has left this void in providing discourse around the bigger meta ideas in life. And we're starting to fill that with science, with all of these other things. And I think that actually, yeah, it's interesting. What have we lost and what has been replaced by technology? And it's Nassim Taleb wrote a little bit of a diatribe complaining about Dominic Cummings' poor understanding of complexity science, which is ironic because all of his books do. He wrote about scientism, which is the appreciation of the aesthetics of scientific understanding, but not actually understanding the rigor. And I think that this is sort of an interesting thing that technology has provided, this instantaneous access to quote unquote answers reduces our anxiety. I'm like, oh, okay, I know now. And so part of the work that I'm doing is also as well, which I think relates to the sublime, is this slight ambiguity that we don't know necessarily, that there is this, this guiding intuition that will take us somewhere. And it's not a process-driven thing. Anyway, so I'm sort of rambling now, but I just thought it was a very interesting concept, the sublime. That
I think, I agree. And I think the biggest challenge is going to be to get humanity to accept the silence, to excite about the silence, excite about the space in between, and really dive in and get the most out of it. I do believe next month when we meet, we're going to be talking about how do we use technology to bring us to the next level that this change, this planetary pandemic is forcing. How do we get there? How do we know everything's different. It's not that we're just pressing pause for a few weeks. We all know that our world has changed irrevocably, whether you want to acknowledge that or not. And so it's how many of us will go in wonderment and willingness to accept, what is this? What is the opportunity? What did I miss out on when I was forced to be out of my home and not with my kids or my loved ones, or being able to pick up the phone at any time, knowing that the person's probably not doing anything on the other end? All of these things, it's really exciting to see what's going to come of it. And I do hope that more and more people are willing to let things come, to not have to have an answer to everything, because anybody that feels they have an answer to everything is probably in the White House of the United States, or just not having their head in the right place.
Okay, well, on that note, then, it was just brilliant to see everybody.
Thanks so much, and Pip, it was great to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Thank you so much for connecting.
All right then, take care, everyone.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Thank you.